This week on A to Z Running, we continue our series about taking on the search engines, this time with the query, how to train for a marathon. In the world of running, more news about Kenya, and it keeps getting stranger. Grant Fisher, two-time Olympic medalist and U.S. record holder in basically everything, is apparently not very talented, and a recent study attempted to reveal the effects of receiving real-time feedback on specific running mechanics markers. Any guesses the results? All this and more on A to Z Running. Welcome back to A to Z Running, where we're helping runners thrive with information, inspiration, and coaching services. I'm Zach, and you can learn everything you need to know about our services at AtoZrunning.com and follow us in the places where we share content, Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify, and anywhere you like to listen to podcasts. Chances are we are there. Speaking of where we are, we've been, since the last time you heard from us, we've been doing a whole lot of things. Andy performed in a musical. She was outstanding. Definitely just took the house down, or whatever the phrase is. As our son said, she broke all her legs. We taught them the phrase break a leg because when I said that to Andy as she was walking out the door one of the nights, the boys were like, "What? Why would you say that to her?" And I had to explain the history of the phrase break a leg as a theater thing such as it is. And it's lots of fun. Also, I have been running-wise preparing for a 5K on the track that I may or may not do. We'll see. Because I would do that at all, I've talked about this before. Running has multiple different kinds of flavors to it for me, and I like all of them. But they're like, my heart of hearts as a runner, or at least my first love in the sport, was the track. And so I very much adore track stuff as a runner. I like racing on the track. I like training on a track. But I just don't spend a lot of time on a track. One, because it's usually in use by other people, like sports that use the facilities. But also, it's not something that I spend a lot of time doing as an adult runner. Race on a track once or twice a year at most, and usually not even that. And so roads are just the normal thing. But the track is so much fun. It's playtime, as Barry McGee once described it. But I started doing some of the stuff to prepare for it and promptly buggered my calf, and don't know exactly whether I'm going to continue to try to pursue this particular race or just chill out for a little bit. This is kind of how the thing goes. From the running perspective of things, you have to basically try the thing in terms of training and preparation. You have to try the thing and see if it's producing the desired adaptations, right? And as it goes, most of the time, it's not terribly relevant whether or not I'm progressing to some degree that I don't have any expectation. I don't even know because I've said this before, I don't train with a watch. I don't time my runs. I don't time anything that I do. I don't even bring a watch anymore most of the time, except for if I need to know time of day so that I don't get back too late. But the reason for that is because I'm doing the thing that my body needs. I'm giving the kind of exertion, the kind of effort that I need, and not worrying too much about the exact details, certainly not about the exact paces and things like that. However, in this particular event, I have to seed myself for the race ahead of time. And so I was talking with the race director, exchanging messages briefly and saying, I'd like to run this. This is kind of like the thing that it would be really swell if I could do this before the end of my running career. And but at the same time, I don't have a clue if I could do that. And this race director would much prefer that I have a realistic time marker. And so I gave him another time that I thought this is probably fairly realistic. But at the end of the day, if I'm not able to train optimally, then in a race like this, I shouldn't take someone else's spot. So there's a limited number of people that run in each of the heats in a track race. And in particular, these races are oriented around college runners because they're trying to run qualifying times for like their national meets or for their regional meets, whatever the thing is they're trying to qualify for. I don't even remember exactly how some of those things work, but they're trying to do that. And so it's much better for a collegian with a legitimate chance at qualifying for something to be in the race than it is for me, who's just some old guy running on the track for fun. And I recall when I was in college, some of those old guys running on the track for fun, and it was always kind of a neat little dynamic that these guys could show up and still do the good stuff. But I may not myself be ready if this calf thing continues to be what it is. I may not be ready for the kind of performance that I should be ready for to be in that heat. And so then I shouldn't run the race in that heat, at least, because I would be taking someone else's spot potentially who could be. So that's where I weigh a situation like this is not the same as a normal race scenario for me, where I would plan ahead of time to choose not to do the race if things are not progressing well enough, and in particular if I'm not able to train optimally enough. And so with the calf being what it is, here's what happens. I try to once a week as I prepare for track race, I try to get on track spikes, run something like a 3K time trial of some sort. And so I get on the track. I do that about a week ago, and my calf was very, very tight and sore afterward on one side. And so that tells me something acute went a little awry. It wasn't just like general soreness in both of them. And so race is a concern. And then I also had to put in a floor in one of our rooms in our house, and so that on top of the way my calf was feeling, I thought I'll take the day off anyway because I need to spend the time doing the floor, and my calf is not responding very well right now. So I thought it was doing well enough. Tried the next time trial in spikes this week, and it just happened again. It was the same kind of scenario. I felt fine running. The calf is no problem while I'm running the thing, and 10 steps after I stop, I can feel it tightening up. And so clearly that's the thing. My first call when in a situation like this is to the laser people. If you are not familiar with the technology ortho laser as a kind of treatment, it is incredible stuff. It's also not widely available. There are not very many places that offer this yet. Highly sophisticated technology. You have to have very particular machines, and it's not a common thing in the United States yet. It's been used quite a bit in other parts of the world, Europe in particular. But as a technology, it's new in this area of the world, and so you're not going to see it a lot of places as of yet. There is one in West Michigan, though, and what it does is we've talked about this a little bit on the podcast. We actually had Dr. John Maskell on, who spent a little bit of time talking about it himself. He's a surgeon, and they use the laser treatment post-surgery to speed along the surgery post-op recovery process. And so that's one use of it, but also soft tissue repair is another. And I have now used the laser treatment when I've had something like a strain in my shin once, some kind of thing in my foot, another thing in a calf, some hamstring stuff. And so anytime something comes up like this, I immediately go to the laser people. I call them up and ask if I can schedule something. And because they're very short appointments, they take about 10 to 15 minutes at most. And so they can always fit somebody in. It's very rare that they can't fit you in at some point in a given day, even last minute, which is great. And now that I say that, you're all going to call them and find out that when they get busy enough, then maybe that's not the case. But usually they've got 1 or 2 time slots still available, kind of thing. So I immediately started laser treatments. That's going to definitely speed along the recovery to some degree. But depending on what exactly is going on with my calf, we'll see. I don't have an answer for you at this time, except that if I don't end up running that particular race, which is only in a couple of weeks anyway, then I'm looking forward to the winter season, which is one of my different kinds of dynamics, which I think I've mentioned in passing, but I think I'll talk about more at length here soon as we get into it. But the way I train during this time of year is very, very different than the way I train other times of year, partly because it's winter and it's miserable outside, and so it's nice to have something a little bit different going on. But also, out of necessity, I've discovered that there's some things that are helpful when I do them, and I need to do them often enough, like at least for a chunk of time each year. And so, more on that in the future. We'll keep you posted on how things are going. But for now, let's get started today with our next search engine topic, how to train for a marathon. Let me briefly recap for you what we're doing here. We decided, Andy and I, as we were planning out the first section of episodes for the 6th year of the A to Z Running podcast, we decided we wanted to try something a little differently than some of the things we've done in the past and see if we can leverage what tend to be common ways that runners find answers to their big questions. And so, the classic search query is the first stop for most people as we're thinking about these things. And I learned, by the way, recently, learn is not quite the right word. I was informed by someone in the counseling realm recently was sharing about how people learn things and learn how to do things. And it was interesting because there appears to be a kind of over time generational progression or evolution on how we learn things. Once upon a time, we learned things from an authority on that topic. And so the example that this person gave was if I want to learn how to cook pot roast, then once upon a time, I did that by asking my mother or grandmother who cooks a great pot roast how to cook a pot roast. Now, the next stage in the evolution, which has happened for some time now, became this kind of like information stage where we go out and we look for information about that topic. And so search queries online being a prime source of that, and then other kinds of sources like social medias and other things. But the interesting observation this person was sharing is that there's another evolution that has been occurring. Again, this is not brand new, but it certainly is newer, has been occurring where now people, especially young people, are even disinclined to go try to find information too much, but rather just want to try it. Just do it and experience it and kind of learn by trying, which is interesting. It's fascinating to me. And actually, I've seen some of the nature of consequence in educational trends in this too, where it's like there was an educational trend once upon a time. Education was do what I say, learn what I tell you to learn. Because I said it, it's a fact, which was the old school teacher kind of dynamic in the old one-room schoolhouse type of thing, right? And over time, that began to transform to teaching students how to find answers to their questions, and that became things like research, learning how to use libraries, learning how to use periodicals, and all of the other kinds of stuff that has information. But you would notice in education for at least the last 10 years or so, and certainly especially the last 10 years, if not quite a bit longer, there's been an undertone of trying to teach students to experience the trial and error of learning, make mistakes. The phrase you'll hear a lot is fail forward, all that kind of stuff. And what's so interesting about that is that you see that now in the way inherently people try to learn to do something, where rather than spend any amount of time, too much time figuring things out before I do it, I just dive right in, and I know I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm just not that worried about it. That is an interesting consideration. Now, when we apply this thinking to running, there's two layers here that I think are great. One, I think the just try it thing is not a terrible thing in running in some sense, but also just try it for too long means two things. One, the risk of failure when I just try it is generally pretty awful, like injuries or miserably failing to achieve my goals, things like that. Not great. And it's not immediate. So if you don't have immediate feedback with something, then the just try it mindset is not terribly effective. So if I can't try a pot roast and find out, that didn't taste great, so next week when I make a pot roast, I'm going to do it a little differently, or maybe I'll just do another one tomorrow or something, right? But in running, it's like 6 months go by before you really know if the thing you're trying is terribly effective. And sometimes it's less time than that. but really it's over long stretches of time. You don't know something is working well until you've given it enough time to prove itself out. Now, if that is the case, which it is, then the first two mindsets of how to learn things are much more important in our sport. Going out and finding information and learning from authorities who have a storehouse of a wealth of experience and information. Those are both great things. Unfortunately, what does tend to be the case is that the authorities in the sport are not quite as accessible at a personal level. And so you can find a lot of information that they have produced, which is the second form of learning new things. And so that's great. Let's go out and find their information. But they themselves are not always terribly accessible to, at a personal level, to individuals, like the millions of runners who are out there. They don't all go call up coaches like Dathan Ritzenhein and say, "Hey, Dathan, you're a great coach. Tell me what I should do." That doesn't usually go that way. So it comes back to information. And that's where the search engine comes into play. See this journey I just took you on, and now realize how deliberate it was? It brings us to the rationale of why the search engine is so important for runners. Okay, so we wanted to have a series where we spend some time trying the search engine for its wisdom in various key queries that runners tend to wonder. And so the first one we shared in our previous episode. If you missed that, you can certainly go back and listen to it. We were talking in that one about couch to 5K, which is a very commonly searched phrase. We go to like Google Trends and some of the other resources out there to find out what people search. And couch to 5K is a very common running related search. Another one of the more common ones out there, is how to train for a marathon. That's what we want to try to tackle this week. By the way, side plug, if you have a search engine question that you would like us to try and react to, share it with us, as one listener already has, which is going to make its way into our series here shortly. Share it with us. You can send us an email. questions@AtoZrunning.com is our easiest way to get in touch. But comment on all the places. If you're on YouTube, comment on YouTube. There's a way to share comments and something like that on Spotify too, I think. Or find us on the social medias. That's tends to be a place where people interact with us the most. Instagram is our main place. Okay, so we want to talk about how to train for a marathon. And what we did is we searched on the search engine how to train for a marathon and then looked at the top 5 results. And we're going to bring that to you here. And the first one, number one result for us was an article by REI. Yes, the outdoor lifestyle brand, REI, is apparently the number one authority on how to train for a marathon, according to the search engines. And the article actually was titled How to Train for a Marathon, which probably helps it come up in the top of the search because it's literally those words. But also, apparently the original title for the article was Training for Your First Marathon. And so someone at one point found out that the other title was likely to produce search results even more, I guess, and so they changed it. Here's what they were talking about in this article. All the stuff. It was like one of those super comprehensive articles that just does everything. The main categories were like considerations to start training for a marathon, how to choose your first marathon, what the building blocks of a marathon training are, how to optimize hydration and fueling and race day, what to keep in mind, like good tips and reminders before, during, and after the race, all of that. So we're going to share a few of those key concepts within the article, and as we like to do, our reactions. So first up there at the start, we appreciated that there was advice against couch to marathon. Couch to 5K is great. Couch to marathon is not the best idea out there. So if you've never run before, or if you're just picking up running for the first time in some time, marathon's not your first stop. That's the general advice here, and we could not agree more. It could be if you're putting enough time over a large period of time into preparing well, it could be, but it ought not to be in general. Okay, next up here, just another note. Primary elements of marathon training, according to this article, are base mileage, which they're defining as easy running, that's conversational, and 3 to 5 times a week is what they're saying. They're talking about long runs, great. They don't specify. So they talk about why a long run is good, because cardiovascular, muscular endurance. That's great. So you can handle a long race. And they say 20 to 25% of your weekly mileage, which is interesting because they go on to then share how long your long run should get. And they build it up slowly. I'm trying to remember the exact numbers here. Yeah, so every week you build it up and you get up to like 15 miles. They don't specify here in this article the magical 20-mile run. But my point being, they talk about getting up to like a 15-mile long run, but the people are doing like under 45 miles in that week, and that's more than 20 to 25% of your weekly mileage. So there's always caveats there, but it seemed like there was kind of some inconsistencies in that. They do mention that many training plans caution against exceeding 3-hour runs due to the poor trade-off and risks of like injury risks and or increased delayed fatigue risks go up the longer you run, especially when you're not in general prepared physiologically to handle something like that, and diminishing returns. And so 3 hours tends to be a good cap for a weekly training run. They talk about speed work in the article, harder workouts like intervals, tempo runs, build fitness, increase aerobic capacity, which is like true for any run, but these help even more, I guess. They give you specific examples in the article, which is not terribly unhelpful, and various distances for if you're doing something like a tempo. They talk about marathon pace for a target for tempos, which is a common phrase you see in marathon training plans. They talk about strength training, which is just, good to be stronger and you can stay healthy. They talk about rest and recovery, preventing injuries and burnout. And they also talk about taking a down week every few weeks, which, by the way, is something every single one of these articles that we encountered refers to at some point. Having whether a down week or a down long run. So like 2 to 3 weeks, you're building up, and then the third or fourth week is a little bit lower, and then you keep building back up. And that's interesting. We'll react to that here in a little bit. And then they talk about the taper, which is, that's classic. They do mention specifically, which I think is valuable, that the taper is only cutting back volume, not intensity, because you need to keep the intensity up to keep you fresh for race day. That's a great comment there. All right, so that overall seems to be a pretty helpful article. It looks like they have some people contributing to that article who know a thing or two about what they're talking about, which is great. Love it. For the number one article on the search query, so far we're feeling like that's a pretty good start. Next, after that, then they have the related questions. Here are other questions people are asking, and it's like, how long does it take to train for a marathon? Apparently it's 12 to 20 weeks, or 14 to 20 weeks, I guess is the common answer. How long for a beginner? Which is the same and with caveats. Talked about 20-mile runs and that you should do one 4 weeks out from your race for no other reason than because that seems like something you should do, according to most people. And then, can you run a marathon if you can run 10 miles? And that seems like a really weird question, because the question is, can I do 26 miles if I can do 10 miles? And the answer is, well, I don't know. You can do 26 miles if you can run 26 miles, but if you can't run 26 miles, then you can't. And doing 10 miles doesn't mean you can run 26 miles. In theory, if you can run healthily any amount, then you can do 26 miles. You could get to that point at some point, but that's all theoretical. And so the answer is a very confident answer. If you can run 8 to 10 miles, that's a good benchmark to say, yeah, you could probably handle a marathon. But then they go on to say, but if you can run 13 miles, even better. And if you can run 15, even better. And it's like, yeah, okay, the longer you can run, the more likely 26 miles is possible. I agree. All right. So those were some related questions that we found very interesting. Next up in the search query was Reddit. Once again, the number 2 result. This is the same thing the last time we did a search query. And I'm just so fascinated. Reddit must be paying at least Google and I'll share why it's Google only. Probably they must be paying them to show up so high, because the question isn't even exactly the same. How to train for my first marathon was the Reddit question, and there's only like 10 answers or 16 at most on some of these questions. And so it's not like there's a ton of people interacting with these posts on Reddit. So what's the deal? I don't know. But this questioner on Reddit basically said, here's what I ran in a half marathon. Here's what I want to try to do for a marathon. How should I train? And do you think that's possible? And why did they think Reddit was the best place to ask that? I don't know. But the top response was very generic and commonplace, parts and pieces here that you'll find anywhere, which we were finding anywhere. Try to build up your volume a bit. They gave a number, 40 miles a week. That's kind of arbitrary, as these things tend to be, but sure, yep. Include a long run each week of 2 to 2.5 hours. That's not a bad recommendation. Include 1 to 2 speed sessions. Yeah, I mean, you could. Do strength exercises. Good. Get sleep and eat well. That's okay. That was by post 1251. So overall, it's just, it's good kinds of stuff for someone who doesn't know what they're doing. However, the questioner already is a runner. And so I think the main thing this person needed probably was more along the lines of, what does it look like to make sure I'm prepared for a marathon versus the other stuff that I do. And so I guess the answer here is just kind of, here's some benchmarks, and maybe you're already doing it, maybe you're not, but could be worse. Then the person shared that their goal race was New York City, and someone else said, well, make sure you do some hill work then too. I thought that was a great suggestion because, those hills, they're not lovely. Someone else shared Hal Higdon stuff. Here, do this was basically the response, and it was a Hal Higdon link. Okay, that at least provides even more specificity. And overall, I don't think nothing was terribly terrible there. It was all pretty straightforward. So, okay, Reddit is not failing on the running side of things, at least as of yet. And that's great. The next article to appear, number 3 on the rank, was Hal Higdon himself. And just his link, his page for marathon training plans. And as you know, Hal Higdon has leveled training plans for everything. There's like 5 or 6 levels for all of his training stuff, and you can buy them for like $40, and that's not too bad. And there's always like an example of one, usually the beginner one, on the page. And so it's not really an informational article. Actually, it's not an informational article at all. He gives a little bit of information on the page to explain how he's doing these training plans, how they should be helping you, and then he gives those examples from the novice plan. So in that sense, you do get some pretty precise information. Not a lot of explanation around it, but, of course, that's because you need to pay for it, which, by the way, probably doesn't feel too bad. For most people, it's like, oh, I just spent $100 or $150 on this race, and I really don't know how to get ready for it. And then if I come along to this place that has a $40 training plan that has a lot of history of people feeling like that's been helpful, yeah, that's quite appealing. Okay, and then number 4 was Runner's World. Number 4. Wow, they got lower on the totem pole this time. Marathon training plans, the best training guides for every level of runner. That's Runner's World's claim. The first thing they do on the page is solicit their training plans, which I think at one point they actually mentioned Hal Higdon too, and then they go on to basically say, but ours are better, which is, I think that's kind of funny. Maybe they don't specifically mention Hal Higdon, but they mention other people's training plans. We'll come back to that. All right, so here's what they did in this article. How long should you train? What types of runs, which marathon should I do, how to determine my goals, and what should be my training plan. And then there's a few other things. So it's this stuff you would expect. Train for 12 to 20 weeks, generally 16 and up. Here are the basic types of runs, and it's just kind of all the predictable stuff. And these are all things that you can do. They share more or less all of them. Which marathon should I do? The 2 recommendations they offer first, which is just baffling to me why these 2, or why particularly they just pick randomly these 2 marathons, were the Run MDI marathon in Maine, which one of our AtoZ runners actually just did this fall. Shout out to Aaron, who is 3rd in the women's race. But that's one that they mentioned. They say it's beautiful, which Aaron would affirm. And then also it's very, very difficult. And then Philadelphia, because it's historical, is their rationale. I just find that to be really strange. 2 random marathons that they say, here you go. These are some ideas. But they're nice ones, I guess. So next up, they said how to determine goals, and then they don't actually answer the question. They say, ask yourself some of these things, and it's just like, do I want to have fun? Do I want to run a performance? I think they could be more helpful there with how to determine appropriate goals for a race, but they don't spend very much time on it. A couple sentences. And then what training plan is where things got interesting to me on this particular article. So Runner's World sells their own stuff here, and no doubt, as with everything, you want a kind of reason why someone would buy this particular plan. So rather than saying like, here's just a good marathon training plan for anyone, what they do is they say, if you want to run this time, like 4 hours, here's your training plan. If you want to run 3:45, here's your plan, or 3:30. And that to me is crazy. That's like, basically they're saying, do this plan and you will run 3:30, or you should be able to run 3:30. And I think that's absurd. You don't know anything about the people who are buying that training plan. How can you make the statement, this plan will help you run 3:30? The connection between the training plan and the time is almost irrelevant. Like, the training plan does not produce a time. It's the combination of the runner and their history in this sport. And so, for instance, if you have a 5-hour runner who thinks, I think I want to run 3:30, and they buy that 3:30 plan, they're not likely to run 3:30 just because they followed that plan. That's one season's worth of improvement. An hour and a half chopping off your marathon time is very unlikely in one season of training, no matter what you're doing. Now, let's say you buy that plan for 3 years in a row. I mean, maybe it's not full 3 years. Maybe it's only 1 year. Could you improve that much? Yeah, probably. But it's not because the plan is a 3:30 plan. That's crazy. Okay, sorry. I had to walk down the tangent because I think it's just balderdash. It's a bunch of malarkey. I'm not a huge fan personally of Hal Higdon's stuff either, but at least he does not say this training plan equates to this time. That's wild. But by the way, what is different? Check this out. What's different between the training plans? And for some of them, it's like the difference between a 3:30 plan and a 3:15 plan is like they added hill workouts. I'm like, are you kidding me? that's the 5 miles a week more and hill workouts. What are you playing at here, Runner's World? This is just wild. All right. Next in their article was something about missing training or if you get injured, and they just basically say, don't worry about it. Rest, because rest is good when you need it, and don't try to run when you're not healthy, and you'll be fine. It's more complex than that, but at least the advice is, don't try to power through it. What if training feels too difficult? There's not a lot there to share for you. They do talk about like mindset, pain levels, tolerance, things like that. But in the spirit of the thing, the reason something's going to feel too difficult could be addressed. There's only a handful of reasons that could be addressed more comprehensively. They've got links to their own articles that probably shares a little bit more about it. I did not click on all their internal links. There's so many of them that I didn't have the time. And then lastly, there's a few things here, kind of like the last stuff. What should I eat? And they talk about how much carbs you can absorb in an hour, stuff like that. What do I need for the race? You need shoes. Great. What should I wear? And then here's all the gear recommendations. And I'm sure they make sales off of all those links. How should I recover? And is all the typical stuff. So it's a kind of comprehensive article, but what's amazing to me is that, and maybe this is why REI showed up first, the REI article is way more educational than the Runner's World article. Runner's World has like all the topics, but they don't hardly give you any information for each topic. It's just like a few sentences about each one, a little blurb. And the REI article is like giving you rationale and explaining how a thing should be helpful. We'll come back to that because they touch on it. They don't necessarily make the connection for you. And maybe there's a reason for that too. But the last article that showed up out of the top 5 was an NPR podcast link. And so they interviewed a running coach by the name of Laura Norris and asked her the stuff about marathoning and how to start training. So it was pretty straightforward stuff. Build a foundation, base training, establish a regular degree of running before you do anything else. And that's great because if you're a beginner, especially, you need that. Keep it easy, maybe run, walk, all good advice. And then lastly, choosing a training plan. And they say a training plan that's safe, sustainable, and motivating. And I just keep thinking, how would the runner who doesn't know what they're doing know if the training plan is safe and sustainable? How would they know that? It was nice sentiment, but I'm not sure that's a terribly helpful thing to articulate, except for that maybe she follows it up by saying, like mine. It's my training plans. Okay, so there's that. Good. Interesting stuff, right? Okay, let's quick zoom out and say we did all of that on the Google search engine, which is not surprising. But I was curious. I took this same query and ran it by two of the most common other alternatives, DuckDuckGo and Bing. DuckDuckGo is the search engine for people who don't want their information being sniped everywhere they go. And so they protect your privacy a little bit more than other search engines. And Bing is Microsoft's alternative to Google. And so DuckDuckGo, no Reddit. Reddit didn't show up at all. Hal Higdon wasn't there. There was way more Runner's World, like multiple Runner's World articles, and more alternative sources, like uncommon things, like a private blog, individual blogs, things like that, which was interesting to me. And then Bing was totally different. Had a lot more products, which I'm not sure if that's like just they allow for more sponsored posts than Google does, but a lot more products and a lot less information. There just weren't that many articles in the first page of Bing search results that were like information about how to train for marathon. It was all buy this thing, here's this training plan, all that kind of stuff. Fascinating differences. So there you have it. Let's react overall. I think we felt like in general when we were reading through these things, there's a lack of explanation. We were hoping for information when we said how to train for a marathon, and we got a lot of what to do in terms of training plans, follow this thing, do this. And that is a piece of the answer for sure, but I would have loved to see more explanation of how the things you're doing are helping you be capable of doing the marathon. The REI article seemed to have some of that. The NPR article, podcast, the Laura Norris coach seems to be more interested in those types of things, and in her website specifically outlines a lot more of those considerations. But the interview was still pretty surfacey, as those things probably will be inevitably. But we would have liked to see more of that. This is an informational query, and it didn't get a lot of the information that we feel like could have been helpful. And then the other thing is just down weeks. Everything was talking about down weeks, and that's a very strange concept to me. And I say that having been an athlete who has trained in that way for many years and previously at a previous time and era, and the realization occurring that if you need a down week, fundamentally what that's meaning is that you are exacerbating your current capacity. So you need to rest it a little bit more to be able to handle what you're doing. And as a concept, that doesn't really bear much, or rather that ought to be defended more and not assumed so much. Because in principle, if you're doing the right amount exertionally, then you should be able to sustain it for long periods of time, where you're not overdoing the volumes, you're not overdoing the intensity, and so your body is receiving adaptations. They take this concept of stress, rest, repeat, and they create a kind of meta version of it within a training cycle, and I don't think that's necessary, fundamentally. It could be at times, and this is where, when we're working with athletes, there does end up being, I guess you could say, in concept, something like a down week. But it's not like this scheduled occurrence. What it is my week got crazy busy, or I'm just feeling like really not motivated this week to run, and I need to scale something back or take an extra day off. We do that when that's needed in response to how the body is handling training adaptations. We don't do that just because it's been 3 weeks and you should do that. And I guess the argument could be, well, if you do a down week every 3 weeks, then maybe you never do start to feel that burnout or start to kind of wear down or anything like that. And the answer is, but if you're attentive to it, then it's not a down week that you need. It's a slight adjustment for a day or two that you need, just to make sure that you're not going too close to the edge all the time. And so I think that the down week is just overkill most of the time. Now, that aside, there wasn't really any talk about why those things were there, just more that they were assumed and they were everywhere. And then the other one was how much to run. We saw so many things talking about 3 to 5 days a week. And if you're going to run a marathon, you need to be running more than 50% of the time. 3 days a week is just really, really low on the level of preparedness scale for something as substantial as 26-mile race, 26 miles all at once. And so doing yourself a favor and saying, if I can't train more than 3 days a week, if I can't do 4 or more days in a week, then marathon shouldn't be my goal right now. And if it's a physiological thing, musculoskeletal thing, or just life constraints thing, that's a consideration that we advise. Now, we're really just kind of being nitpicky at this point, because what it comes down to is that was pretty good. It was as far as search queries go, it could have been worse. As I mentioned, the one thing is I really would have liked to see more information and less selling products. But I guess that's kind of the nature of how the wonderful Wild West of the worldwide Wild West works, because no one's really trying to give anything away for free unless it can somehow produce some value for them. So that makes sense. All right. Well, what's next? We mentioned we're going to be talking about some other things. We're going to ask the search engine how to get faster. We're going to ask the search engine what's the best workout for runners. Questions like that. We're going to ask the search engine about the effects of aging on performance. And then the question is, what else do you think we should ask? And offer some suggestions, and we may just do that. So questions at AtoZrunning.com is a good place to send an email, and we will see if we can't fit your thoughts into one of our next episodes. For now, let's move on to the latest news and updates from the world of running.
Let's kick things off in the world of running with A to Z Runner updates.
Oh, Andy, you're miraculously back.
I am. I've jumped right in.
Well, you weren't there before, and now you are.
Now I am. I'm here.
Magic.
Everyone.
Well, anyway, back to the point.
Yeah. Starting with the Veterans Marathon, where Dan was first in his age group.
Nice work, Dano.
Yeah.
Really exciting stuff.
In the Ocean City Marathon, Kate ran her best performance in 20 years.
Did you know this is the second time she's run her best performance in 20 years this year?
And she ran even faster. She keeps getting faster and faster.
Like 6 minutes.
Yeah.
Kate, you're incredible.
Incredible.
You're just really doing it. In the Chickamauga Battlefield Marathon, what a name. I feel like if that's the name of your race, then you automatically get to be the greatest race ever. Craig ran, and it said it was really cool. Really cool.
In his 8th marathon this year.
Yeah, or more.
Amazing.
And at the Dirty Duel 5K trail run, Dan was first in his age group. Again.
He tends to do that.
He does. This race is unique, by the way. Those who are not familiar with it, which is probably most of you listening, this event in particular has 2 courses, and you pick which route you want to take in the midst of the race.
Choose your torture.
It is. And one of the courses is much more difficult, but it's shorter. The other one is a little bit less difficult, but it's a little longer. And so you got to decide, do I want to run it a little bit longer and easier, or take that?
What did Dan choose? Do you know?
I don't actually know.
Oh.
But I'll find out because we're going to be talking about it. All right. So he was first in his age group. In the Monumental Marathon, really exciting stuff out of Indianapolis, we had 2 debut marathoners, Drew and Kyle, both running their first marathon, which means personal best times.
So good.
Very exciting. And Zach was 3rd in his age group as well.
That's really impressive, especially because he just jumped in, right?
Well, yeah, kind of.
I mean, he's been training.
About a month before he decided he wanted to do a marathon. But Zach has been training well.
Yeah, he trains well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. And then in the Monumental half, Ben and Violet both ran.
Yeah. And Violet ran a PR.
That she did.
Very cool. Congrats.
Keeping up with the excitement. Jump over to Madison now, because at the Madison Marathon, we had another debutante. Elijah ran his debut marathon and thoroughly enjoyed it. Okay, so prior to this is another example of Elijah reached out to me. We've been working together for some time, and he was building toward a half marathon race this season, completed it, and it went very well, swimmingly.
But it was running, not swimming.
Right. He ran swimmingly. And then, it wasn't actually, it was before the half when we talked about this. His pal, who's also one of our runners, Spencer, wanted to run the Madison Marathon and said, hey, Elijah, you should come and do this with me. And Elijah's like, I've never run farther than 16 miles, ever. And I'm certainly not preparing for a marathon right now. My goal race is a half, and I'm about to do it. It's like in a week. And this marathon is like 2 weeks after that. And Elijah and I talked about it, and he said, is this a good idea? And I said, probably not necessarily, but should you not do it? I mean, you could. You've been training. You've been training well. It's a little more than you're prepared to do right now, but, So after having run no further than 16 miles, he ran a marathon, and he's got the bug.
He's got the bug. He wants to do it again. Well, he had a great debut. So.
Yes. And at that,
Impressive.
I mentioned already, Spencer ran it with him. Well, not specifically with him, but they were together. They traveled together and had a big it was like a crew of them all going to this race together. It was cool. Mm-hmm. And lastly, at the USA Track and Field Cross Country Relay Championships of Wisconsin, Paul ran with his relay team.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cross country. Love it.
All right. Let's get on to the global topics now.
This is so interesting to me. This is the headline. According to Grant Fisher's coach, he doesn't have much talent.
That's my headline. That's not the headline.
Well, I think deserves a couple question marks in the end. Doesn't have much talent?
Well, the exact words of the coach at this lecture he was giving at a run camp in the summer was, Grant Fisher is not anywhere near the most talented athlete that he's coached. Now, let's talk about Grant Fisher for a second, because this coach just said this about this athlete. 2 Olympic medals, 2 other top 5 finishes, one at the Olympics and one in the World Championships, 4 United States records, 3 North American records, 2-time high school footlocker champ, sub-4 miler in high school, the 7th American ever
in high school
to run under 4, and an NCAA champion as an underclassman. And his coach said he's coached a whole lot more talented runners, and I don't believe him. I do not believe him, and neither does anyone on Let's Run's message boards either.
Well, I don't put much stock in that.
What are you talking about, man?
The thing that's silly is that if he has shown so much success at an early age and then continued to develop, that means he does have talent. I am guessing the reason that his coach said that is because he's like, you can work hard and you can achieve. But the thing is that Grant Fisher's starting point was already really good, and he's continued to progress to see the fruit of his work and his talent.
I think the coach was saying this because he was talking to a group of young runners. He was trying to encourage them to say that the way you train can make a very big difference. You don't have to be the most talented. But he used the worst possible example.
I think it's not a great example because of how successful he was so early.
Grant Fisher is one of the most accomplished runners in the history of time.
Yeah.
And he said he's not as talented.
I wonder too, I mean, it kind of sounds bad coming from the coach because it's like, oh, it's not his talent, it's how well I've coached him.
Well, actually, that's not how he said it, though.
No,
what he was talking about is how Grant Fisher...
But it kind of sounds bad.
No, he was actually praising Grant, he was very generous in his words.
Good.
Fisher has been, without a doubt, one of the most deliberate and intelligent athletes that we have seen on this stage. And I say that in that way, not because others aren't, but in terms of how he has been able to train when he does not always have circumstances where, he doesn't always have access to the most resources and the best coaches. There's been stretches of time where it's like Grant Fisher knows how to get the most out of what he's doing. And that's what his coach was talking about. Now, I can't corroborate any of that. I don't know myself because it sounds like Fisher's also had the best possible resources too at times. So whatever the point may be, we know Grant Fisher's amazing, and his coach was probably just being hyperbolic.
Yeah, yeah.
That's our most generous assessment. All right. Let's talk about Kenya again for a minute. We can't stop talking about Kenya because they keep doing things, and they're very strange things. So the latest is Kenya just put in a bid to host the 2029 World Championships. Okay. This is strange for a number of reasons. First, because Kenya is borderline risking being banned as a country. So how can you host a World Championships that you're banned from? That's a risk, right? Borderline there. And one of the major caveats for Kenya to not be banned is the stipulation they were given in 2016, where they had to form an anti-doping agency and hold their athletes more accountable, like a better system and structure for reinforcing adherence to the rules, integrity in sport. And they did that. And then it proceeded to be terribly corrupt. And then they cut 90% of its budget just recently. So now they almost don't have an anti-doping organization anymore. And that was one of the main things they needed to do well in order to not be banned as a country. And they have not done that. So that's shocking. But it gets weirder because the reason they cut 90% of the funding to the anti-doping agency is because Athletics Kenya, their governing sport body, they're cash strapped. They got very little money. And they had pledged in 2023 to increase the funding for the anti-doping agency by $5 million a year. And they didn't even make it to do that the first year. They didn't have the funds, or maybe they did, but they put them in other uses. We don't know, but they didn't give the $5 million they had pledged already. And to host the World Championships is no cheap thing. In fact, there's actually a dollar amount. Do you have an idea? You know what it is?
I'm gonna guess $15 million.
It generally costs about $70 to $80 million to host the World Championships. Like that's how much people are losing to do that, and sometimes more. And so, how is that going to be possible? How could Kenya host an event that they most certainly can't fund based on their current actions? So it's just weird. It's very strange, and none of this is. Don't interpret our coverage of the Kenya situation as anything other than just trying to figure out the facts here. We know that in the year 2012, let me back up. Sorry. We know that the reasons for their violation of rules are fairly straightforward, fairly clear. And what it comes down to is you have essentially very, very high incentives for someone to break the rules a little bit if they can get away with it because of how valuable it is for them. And before I share the specifics on that, let me just note the other thing that was strange is they've also apparently just recently, World Athletics has opened an investigation into Kenya for age cheating, which is a long acknowledged reality within Kenya in particular, that athletes have, whether out of ignorance because they literally don't know their actual birth date, or deliberately, and it's a mixture of both, because the age cheating thing allows an athlete to compete in divisions and such that they're not technically qualified to. And so there has been a long history of that, not just in Kenya, but in the sport in general. It just so happens to be the case that Kenya has been a chief violator of that dynamic. Anecdotally, it hasn't been pursued aggressively before, but it may be now. So just so much controversy surrounding this situation, and it just not adding up. Now, let's talk about the incentives for a moment, because it's no surprise that the culture of rules violations has grown to what it has become. Let's talk about the ESPN article that was written around the time of Sammy Wanjiru's death. Sammy Wanjiru is a multiple-time world marathon majors champion, or at least once. I can't remember now if all of his wins were majors or other things, but he won Chicago at least once and has won many other things prior to his death. And at the time when ESPN was writing coverage, they were talking about how his life was not the glamour that one would expect it to be, because what basically the assumption is a Kenyan who makes it big is basically like a national hero, because they are. The sport of running is a very popular sport in Kenya. Everybody knows who these champions are.
Which is awesome.
Which may be awesome, but apparently also is not awesome a lot of the time. For instance, there have been reports from interviews with Sammy Wanjiru over the years that he actually stopped going home and started living in other places around the world, because when he would go home, there would be lines of people knocking on his door like all day long, wanting to meet him, asking for handouts, because as a marathon champion, he's wealthy. And also just like all of that, like, you know, they love him. He's a national hero, and they know where he lives, and they want to meet him. They were asking him to help them or help their kid to become a great runner, all this kind of stuff. And so it became so much that he stopped even going home to Kenya, which is tragic. Now, the ESPN coverage went further down the rabbit hole and said in 2012, the average farmer in Kenya, which is one of the more common occupations, especially outside of the cities, the average farmer made $736 per year. And that was living wage. Like, they were living on $736 a year. A good marathoner will make about $50,000 in prize money in a year. And if you are good enough, the great ones are winning a majors, you win a majors and you're making more than $100,000 in a single race. Okay, that is a lifetime fortune in Kenya. And so what happens is a runner hits it big like that, and they're set. All it takes is one big break. Now you ask yourself, could you convince someone to potentially bend the rules a bit and cheat a bit if they knew that they could be set? Not just them, their families and their close relatives and neighbors are set for life if they can win that one race, one time. That's crazy. So the history of this gets even more interesting, because before COVID changed things, and I don't know exactly why, but post-COVID, there's a lot of different things in the local running scenes than there used to be. But before COVID, it was generally commonplace to see Kenyan runners in the top couple spots just about everywhere. As long as the race had prize money, you were likely to see some foreign runner in that race. And there's a reason for that, because there are people who will offer to runners, I have this house, and I'll rent it to 5 or 6 of you. I'll pay your flights so you can come to the States for 6 months or a year or something and run races around this area. There's a lot of prize money to be had if you're running a bunch of different races around the area. And then what that becomes is a cut goes to the coach who helped do that, and a cut goes back home. And these runners, by winning local 5Ks and 10Ks and things like that are paying $500 or $1,000 a race, are able to make enough money to feed their families on a percentage of those winnings. Like, that's huge. And that has been going on for years. Now, after COVID, that's not happening very much, hardly at all anymore. And I think mostly because races just really aren't paying prize money anymore. Outside of bigger ones, the little ones aren't doing it anymore. And they used to do it a lot. So low-tier runners, by the hundreds and hundreds, could make enough money to sustain their families. So you think about that, and that's just $500,000 here and there. What about if it's $5,000 here and there? And the only difference between a runner making $500 or $1,000 here and there and one making $5,000 is just a slight bump up, level up a little. And so then again, you ask that same question. If breaking the rules just a bit means your family is set, would you do it? And they've studied this. Remember the study?
No.
When they asked athletes if you could take a drug that no one would ever detect, and you would die in 5 years, but all your hopes and dreams in sport would be achieved in that time, but you definitely would die in 5 years, would you take the drug? And it's definitely against the rules. Would you do it? Over 50% said yes.
That's all runners. They're not just looking at one specific area.
No, they were looking at athletes.
Elite level athletes.
Yep. Over 50% said yes.
No.
And that was just purely selfish motive. Add in something like if you could provide for your family for the rest of their lives and all you had to do was cheat enough to win one race, would you do it? I don't begrudge a single person who says yes to that. And here we find ourselves. This is mostly speculation, I understand, but here we find ourselves in a situation where the incentive structure is reasonable and the accountability structures are basically non-existent, and the ones that have been in place are quite corrupt. It's no surprise that it has become a systemic problem. We don't really know how to solve it as a governing body, sport body, except to say you guys have got to do something about this because it is not fair to the people who are following the rules.
This is a really sad conversation.
Yep, which is why we're going to end on a happy note. You ready for it?
Yeah.
Okay. In the headlines, well, actually in a study, because I thought, let's find some cool research on something. In a January 2024 study, very recent, published in the American Orthopedic Society for Sports Medicine, they wanted to find out the effects of putting, I don't know what it's a kind of wearable tech as a shoe insole in your foot that measures some various biomechanical markers and then gives you real-time feedback, like in your ear in headphones while you're running, to tell you whether you should make adjustments to your running mechanics.
Interesting.
All right. And so primarily measuring two types of things, cadence and stride length, which are kind of part of the same thing, and ground contact position. So it's measuring if your heel's hitting the ground more, your toe, middle foot, things like that. And then cadence and stride length. And what they did is they developed a kind of ideal range in all of these things. And then as you're running, when you get more than 5% outside of that ideal for 20 steps or more, then it cues an audio feedback and it will say something that you need to adjust.
Wow.
Faster stride length or faster cadence or something like that. And so they took a group of runners, it was like 200 and some odd runners, and half of them got the feedback and half of them didn't. They were all wearing the tech, but only half of them were actually hearing the feedback. And so they're still measuring the same things for all of them. And then they tried to find out what effect that would have on injuries and performance. So first, no effect on performance, which is not surprising because these are the kinds of things that
take time.
Yep. However, they found an interesting effect on injuries, which is to say athletes who were receiving the feedback reported less severe injuries at the moment of injury and fewer injuries that lasted fewer than 7 days.
Wait, say that again.
Fewer injuries that lasted fewer than 7 days.
Okay.
Which to me is kind of weird because an injury, in my mind, is something that probably doesn't just go away after 4 days. But they're defining it very loosely. As a matter of fact, even just discomfort was included in this.
Okay.
So this is what they're finding. They're finding that an athlete with the audio feedback on their form is probably feeling better while they're running, which does not surprise us. And they're feeling like they're not getting as much of the immediate like sorenesses or pains, aches and pains that others are getting. But when it comes to like substantial injuries, 7 days or more, there's no effect. So I think that tells us what we already know about deliberate movement, which is to say you're going to feel better when you run. And we're not promising that it's going to have long-term effects on your injuries because there's other things that are contributing to that more, but you're going to feel better.
Yeah.
And don't you want to feel better?
Yeah, we do want to feel better. Mm-hmm.
So we are fascinated, and I look forward to researching more of this kind of stuff because it's cool.
Well, great. Thanks for letting me join for the world of running, Zach, even if it's just for the end. We hope that you guys all have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week.